hidden in the darkest pages of World War II, wrapped in smoke, mountains, snow, and silence. Today, we travel to southern Italy, to a cold dawn in 1944, when a simple cargo train overloaded, poorly supplied, and facing impossible conditions, quietly transformed into a gas chamber on rails. What unfolded inside that tunnel was not an explosion, not a derailment, not fire. It was something much quieter: death. Moving invisibly, filling packed wagons of desperate stowaways trying to reach the north. A cloud of carbon monoxide, thick and inescapable, trapped inside the mountain, taking more than 500 lives in minutes. And there was one man who witnessed the horror. Michel, the brakeman in the last Cartha-Oni wagon that remained outside the tunnel. The only one who survived to describe what he heard, and what he saw when he stepped inside the darkness with a lantern, discovering bodies dropping as though the entire train had fallen asleep at once. This is the true story of the Balvano tunnel, disaster train that became a gas chamber. Southern Italy, March 1944, existed in a fragile space between chaos and survival. German forces had retreated north, the Allies occupied the south, but nothing truly worked. The war had drained the land, destroyed roads, ruined bridges, improvised tracks, aging locomotives barely holding together. Balvano, a tiny town at the foot of the Lucanian Apennines, was cold at dawn. Moisture clung to the rocks, and a thin wind slid down the mountain like a whispered warning. Through that landscape crawled a slow, exhausted cargo train, loaded far beyond its limits and climbing the steep rails in miserable conditions. It was train 8017. For the railway workers, it was nothing but another heavy transport carrying coal, supplies, and hundreds of them. In those desperate times, civilians hid inside freight cars to reach towns where food or work might still exist. On tis night, the train carried around 500 stowaways, squeezed between sacks of flour, crates of goods, and the metallic scent of rust. In the last car stood Michel Costa, the brakeman, a man familiar with danger, with unstable tracks, with machines always moments from failure. But something about this night unsettled him. The uneven sound of the locomotive, the weak rhythm of the engine as it climbed, the strange heaviness in the air. The locomotive burned the worst kind of coal-cheap, impure wartime fuel that produced little power and too much smoke. Much more smoke than normal. Michel had warned the engineer hours earlier. "With this coal, we won't make it up the mountain." "We'll make it," the engineer grumbled. "It'll just be slow." But Michel remained unconvinced. He knew what awaited them on this route. The Delle Armi Tunnel, nearly 2 kilometers long and infamous for its terrible ventilation. Even strong locomotives struggled there. And on this cold night, with thin rain falling and air completely still, the mountains seemed poised to swallow them whole. At 12:50 a.m., train 8017 entered the tunnel, and immediately, Michel felt something was wrong. The engine's rhythm weakened. Moisture dripped down the tunnel walls like tears, and the train slowly began losing power. Inside the Delle Armi Tunnel, darkness was absolute, heavy, suffocating, physical. As the train advanced, metal echoes bounced against the stone walls, like the mountain had a heartbeat. Michel watched the wagons ahead disappear into pitch-black night. Only his car remained outside the tunnel. The train crawled forward, the locomotive fighting the incline. No one inside the wagons realized this would be their final conscious moments. 300 meters into the tunnel, the train slowed further. 500 meters. 800 meters. Then the engine died. The entire train stopped almost completely inside the tunnel. Michel heard silence, an unnatural silence for a machine of that size. Then came a sound he would never forget. The crew opening the firebox and shoveling huge amounts of that poor coal inside to try to force the locomotive to push forward. But in a tunnel with no ventilation, they were filling the space with carbon monoxide. Invisible, odorless, colorless, lethal. Inside the wagons, people began to feel strange. Headaches, dizziness, sudden warmth, an overwhelming urge to sleep. Some lay down to rest. Others slumped where they sat. A few tried to open cracks for air, but the tunnel was a sealed tomb. And then, silence. Michelle, standing outside, began hearing soft thuds, regular, unsettling, echoing from inside the darkness. Thump, thump, thump. He thought perhaps the train was shifting, but soon he realized they were bodies falling in the wagons. Death, invisible and silent, was already moving through them. Instinct told him to stay where he was, but conscience pushed him to act. He grabbed his lantern, inhaled deeply, and stepped into the tunnel. The moment the light pierced the blackness, he understood he was walking into a gas chamber. If you are enjoying these true mysteries, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to follow all our stories. The air inside the tunnel clung to his skin, hot, heavy, thick, like a formless smoke. Michelle walked with a lantern trembling in his hand, not from the vibration of the rails, but from the rising dread twisting in his stomach. The beam revealed the first body just a few steps inside. A young man, maybe 20 years old, lying on his side, eyes half closed, face peaceful, as if sleeping. Michelle touched his shoulder. The truth was immediate. He was dead. A few meters later, another, and another. Then dozens, reaching the first freight car. Michelle saw something that would scar his memory forever. The passengers were exactly where they had been sitting, some leaning against wooden walls, others with hands folded on their laps, many resting their heads peacefully. Death had taken them too quickly for struggle. Short of breath himself, Michelle shouted, "Is anyone alive? Can anyone hear me?" But his voice sank into the darkness, swallowed by the mountain. His lantern illuminated the next car. Entire families, frozen in final embraces. Young workers lying still in exhausted poses. Women slumped peaceably. No panic, no chaos. Just silence. By the time he reached the center of the tunnel, something even more terrifying became clear. Hours later, when railway workers finally arrived, they found Michelle sitting on the ground, drained, repeating the same broken phrase. They died sleeping. All of them. Sleeping. No one believed it. Until they entered. The tunnel's darkness felt heavier now. Suffocating. The walls were coated in oily black soot. The temperature inside was warmer than the outside air, as though the mountain still held the heat of the disaster. Lantern beams revealed scenes that froze even seasoned workers. People standing upright, leaning on walls. People sitting on crates. People lying, as though resting from a long journey. Families embracing each other. All lifeless. Rescuers could only stay inside 4 minutes at a time before dizziness forced them out. Eben in death, the gas lingered. The removal took 3 days. The final, staggering count. 521 dead. Italy's worst rail disaster caused not by collision nor explosion, but by an invisible poison inside a mountain. It took days for authorities to understand the tragedy's magnitude. When they finally pieced it together, one disturbing truth emerged. Everyone was responsible. And no one was. Allied forces supplied the low-quality coal. Italian railway oversight was inconsistent. Stowaways boarded out of pure desperation. Old locomotives weren't fit for the mountain. The tunnel had nearly no ventilation. The disaster was not a single mistake, it was a chain of small failures in a country torn apart by war. Officials tried to downplay the event. Newspapers reported little due to military censorship. Documents vanished. Others were archived improperly. For decades, few knew what had truly happened in Balvano. But Michelle never forgot. He avoided tunnels for the rest of his life. The smell of smoke real or imagined haunted him. The echo of falling bodies replayed endlessly in his mind. He was the only person directly connected to the train who survived. And the mountain still stands today, silent, indifferent, holding the memory of that night when an entire train stopped breathing. The Balvano tunnel disaster remains one of the least known tragedies of World War II, an event shaped by poverty, war, neglect, and silent death. Here on Dark Curiosity Hub, we revive the stories time tried to erase, giving voice to real tragedies that reveal the darker side of human history. Tell us in the comments a topic you're curious about and want to know more about. Subscribe to the channel and see you next time for another mystery.